The rain hammered against the windows of Brew and Muse, a cozy coffee shop nestled in Seattle's Capitol Hill, where the city's eclectic pulse met the gray melancholy of a Pacific Northwest afternoon. The sky was a stubborn slate, refusing to let even a sliver of sunlight through. Inside, the air was rich with the scent of roasted coffee beans, mingling with the faint sweetness of pastries and the soft strum of an indie folk playlist. The shop buzzed with life students hunched over laptops, their screens glowing with half-finished essays, freelancers typing furiously to meet deadlines, and a few grizzled regulars sipping black coffee, flipping through worn paperbacks or the morning's Seattle Times. Emma Grayson burst through the glass door, her umbrella dripping a small puddle onto the hardwood floor. At 27, she was a freelance graphic designer with a penchant for chaos, her chestnut hair plastered to her forehead from a mad dash across the street. Her messenger bag, slung carelessly over one shoulder, bulged with dog-eared notebooks, a battered copy of On the Road, and a tangle of charging cables. Emma's life was a constant juggling act: client, deadlines, creative dreams, and the nagging feeling she was always one step behind where she was supposed to be. She scanned the crowded shop for an empty table, her hazel eyes narrowing in frustration. Every seat was taken. The room, a mosaic of laptops, coffee cup, and murmured conversations. She sighed, resigning herself to the line snaking toward the counter, when her gaze landed on a guy sitting alone by the window. He was hunched over a sketchbook, his dark hair falling into his eyes as his pencil moved in quick, deliberate strokes. There was something arresting about him, the way his brow furrowed in concentration, the smudge of graphite on his knuckles, the quiet intensity that seemed to carve out a bubble around him in the noisy shop. He looked like he'd stepped out of a moody indie film, not a bustling coffee shop. Emma caught herself staring, her heart giving a little lurch. Get it together, Em, she thought, shaking her head. She was still staring when she bumped into the person in front of her, her umbrella clattering to the floor. Oh, crap, I'm so sorry, she blurted, scrambling to retrieve it. The guy by the window glanced up, his gray eyes meeting hers for a fleeting moment before he dropped his gaze back to his sketchbook. Her cheeks flushed hot. Great, nothing. Says I'm a functional adult, like tripping over your own umbrella. Emma ordered her chola lavender latte with oat milk and leaned against the counter, stealing another glance at sketchbook guy. He was still drawing, oblivious to the chaos around him. The barista slid her latte across the counter, the foam art a perfect fern leaf, and Emma took a deep breath. She needed a table, and his was the only one with an empty seat. Don't be weird, she told herself. Just ask to sit. It's not like you're proposing. She approached his table, clutching her latte like a shield. Hey, is this seat taken? She asked, gesturing to the empty chair across from him. He looked up, and this time, his eyes lingered on her. They were a deep, stormy gray, like the Puget Sound on a restless day. Nah, go for it, he said, his voice low and slightly rough, like he didn't use it often. He pushed his sketchbook to the side, making room. Thanks, Emma said, sliding into the chair. She set her bag on the floor and pulled out her laptop, trying to act casual. The silence between them was heavy but not awkward, more like the pause before a song starts. She sipped her latte, stealing glances at him over the rim of her cup. His hands were smudged with graphite, and there was a tiny scar above his left eyebrow, barely noticeable but intriguing. She wondered how he got it. I'm Emma, by the way, she said, breaking the silence before it could settle too deeply. He hesitated, like he was weighing whether to share his name. Noah, he said finally. Nice to meet you, Noah. She smiled, hoping it didn't look as nervous as she felt. What are you drawing? He flipped the sketchbook closed, almost reflexively. Just stuff. Nothing special. She raised an eyebrow, leaning forward slightly. You were going at it pretty hard for nothing special. A ghost of a smile tugged at his lips, and it was the kind of smile that made her want to see it again. Fair point. It's just a habit. Keeps my hands busy. Emma nodded, sensing he wasn't ready to open up. She opened her laptop and tried to focus on her latest project, a logo for a local vegan bakery that wanted something earthy but modern, you know, like a forest meets a spaceship. But her eyes kept drifting to Noah. His pencil moved in quick, precise strokes, and the intensity in his expression was magnetic. She wanted to know what he was drawing, what made him tick, but she didn't want to push. So, you come here a lot? She asked, cringing at how cliché it sounded the second it left her mouth. He shrugged, not looking up. When I need to get out of my head. Yeah, this place has good vibes. Same, she said. Though I'm usually fighting for a table. You must have gotten here at like dawn to snag this spot. He chuckled, a soft, warm sound that made her stomach flutter. Something like that. They fell into an easy rhythm after that, trading small talk between sips of coffee and bursts of work. Emma learned that Noah was 30, a freelance illustrator who'd moved to Seattle from Chicago a year ago. He didn't say much about why he left, but there was a quiet weight to his words, like he was carrying something he wasn't ready to unpack. Emma, on the other hand, couldn't stop talking once she got going about her chaotic childhood in Portland, where her parents ran a quirky bookstore. Her love for cheesy rom-coms she'd seen When Harry Met Sally at least a dozen times, and her dream of designing album covers for indie bands. Noah listened, his eyes softening as she rambled, and she felt a spark she hadn't felt in a long time. By the time the rain stopped, they'd been talking for 2 hours. The shop was starting to empty out, the after-work crowd thinning as the evening settled in. Emma realized with a pang that she didn't want to leave. I should probably get going, she said reluctantly, packing up her laptop. Got a deadline breathing down my neck. Yeah, me too, Noah said, though he didn't move. He was looking at her like he wanted to say something but wasn't sure how. She stood, slinging her bag over her shoulder. Maybe I'll see you around. He nodded, his eyes crinkling at the corners. Maybe, as she stepped out into the damp evening air, the streetlights casting a soft glow on the wet pavement. Emma couldn't shake the feeling that she'd just met someone who was going to change her life. She pulled her jacket tighter, a smile tugging at her lips. Seattle felt a little less gray tonight. The next few days were a blur of deadlines and coffee runs, but Emma couldn't stop thinking about Noah, his quiet intensity, his guarded smile, the way he seemed to carry a story she was dying to hear. She found herself lingering at Brew and Muse longer than necessary, hoping to catch him again. On Wednesday, her persistence paid off. She pushed through the door, the bell jingling above her, and there he was, at the same window table, his sketchbook open and a black coffee steaming beside him. Her heart did a little flip. Play it cool, she thought, ordering her latte and scanning the room. The shop was packed again, and his table was the only one with an open seat. Fate, or just Seattle's chronic lack of seating. She approached, latte in hand. Mind if I join you again? She asked, her voice lighter than she felt. Noah looked up, and this time, his smile came easier. Go for it. She settled in, pulling out her laptop and pretending to focus. But the air between them felt different today, charged. Like the moment before a storm. They worked in silence for a while, the clatter of keyboards and the hiss of the espresso machine filling the space. Emma stole glances at him, noticing the way his fingers gripped the pencil, the faint stubble along his jaw. She wondered what he was drawing today, but she didn't ask. Not yet. So, she said eventually, leaning back in her chair. What's the deal with the sketchbook? You're always so intense about it. He paused, his pencil hovering over the page. It's just how I process things, he said after a moment. Drawing's like breathing for me, always has been. She nodded, intrigued. You ever show anyone your stuff? Not really, he said, his tone clipped but not unkind. It's personal. Fair enough, she said, sensing the wall he'd put up. But if you ever change your mind, I'd love to see it. I'm kind of a nerd for art. He raised an eyebrow, a flicker of amusement in his eyes. You're a designer, right? What kind? Graphic design, mostly. Logos, branding, that kind of thing. But I'd kill to do something more creative, like album covers or book illustrations. Something with soul, you know. He nodded, his expression softening. Yeah, I get that. Soul's hard to come by in freelance work. Tell me about it, she said, rolling her eyes. My last client wanted a logo that was minimalist but also maximalist. I'm still recovering from that one. He laughed, a real laugh this time, and it was like a crack in his armor. That's brutal. Worst I had was a guy who wanted a mural of his dog, but it had to look like Abraham Lincoln. No way, Emma said, laughing so hard she nearly spilled her latte. Did you do it? Hell no. I told him my style was more modern canine than presidential pooch. They fell into a rhythm after that, swapping stories about their worst gigs and the quirks of freelance life. Emma told him about the time she accidentally sent a client a mock-up with a placeholder that said, "Insert cool design here," and Noah admitted he'd once drawn an entire comic strip for a client who forgot to mention they wanted it in color. The conversation flowed effortlessly, like they'd known each other for years instead of days. As the afternoon stretched on, Emma realized she was stalling. She didn't want to leave, didn't want to break whatever spell was keeping them here. Talking like the rest of the world didn't exist. Noah seemed to feel it, too. He wasn't packing up, even though his coffee cup was long, empty. "So, what's your deal, Noah?" she asked, emboldened by the ease between them. "You're this mysterious artist guy who drinks black coffee and draws like his life depends on it. What's the story?" He leaned back, his fingers tapping the edge of his sketchbook. "Not much to tell. Grew up in Chicago, moved here for a change of scenery. I draw, I try to stay out of trouble." She tilted her head, studying him. "That's the short version. What's the long version?" His smile faded, and for a moment, she thought she'd pushed too far. "Long version's complicated," he said, his voice quieter. "Let's just say I needed a fresh start." She nodded, sensing the weight behind his words. "Fair enough. I'm kind of a pro at fresh starts myself. Moved to Seattle 3 years ago, after a spectacularly bad breakup and a job that made me want to pull my hair out." He raised an eyebrow. "Bad breakup, huh? Oh yeah, the kind where you find out your boyfriend's been texting his ex the whole time you're planning a future together. Classic." She said it lightly, but the sting was still there, faint but persistent. Noah winced. "Ouch. Sounds like he was an idiot." "Understatement," she said, grinning. "But it got me here, so I guess I can't complain too much." He looked at her, his gray eyes steady. "Seattle's lucky to have you." Her cheeks warmed, and she ducked her head, pretending to adjust her laptop. "Smooth talker," she teased, but her heart was racing. They stayed until the barista started wiping down tables. A subtle hint that closing time was near. Emma packed up reluctantly, her mind buzzing with the easy connection they'd found. "See you around, Noah," she said as she stood. "Yeah," he said, his voice soft. "See you, Emma." She walked home through the drizzle, her steps lighter than they'd been in weeks. Noah was a puzzle she wanted to solve, and for the first time in a long time, she felt like she was exactly where she was supposed to be. Over the next few weeks, Emma and Noah became fixtures at Brew and Muse. It wasn't planned, exactly, it just happened. Emma would show up with her laptop, Noah would be there with his sketchbook, and they'd end up sharing a table, talking for hours. Sometimes they worked in companionable silence, the clink of coffee cups and the murmur of the shop creating a cocoon around them. Other times, they'd get lost in debates. Emma was Team Taylor Swift. Noah swore by the national land swap stories about their lives. Emma talked about her childhood in Portland, where her parents' bookstore was a haven for misfits and dreamers. Noah shared snippets of his life in Chicago, though he was careful to skirt around the details. Emma found herself looking forward to those afternoons more than she cared to admit. Noah was guarded, but he had a dry sense of humor that caught her off guard, and when he smiled, really smiled, it was like the sun breaking through Seattle's eternal clouds. She started noticing little things about him, the way he tapped his pencil against his lips when he was thinking, the way he always ordered his coffee black but added a pinch of cinnamon from the shaker on the counter, the way he seemed to relax when she was around, his shoulders loosening like he'd been holding his breath. One rainy Thursday, they were deep in a discussion about their favorite movies. Mo was defending Clueless as a cinematic masterpiece, while Noah argued for Drive. He surprised her. "You ever been to the Fremont Troll?" he asked, closing his sketchbook. "The what now?" she said, laughing. "It's this giant concrete sculpture under a bridge. Kinda creepy, kinda cool. I was thinking, maybe we could check it out sometime." Her heart did a little somersault. Was he asking her out? Or was this just a friendly hang? She played it cool, tucking a strand of hair behind her ear. Yeah, that sounds awesome. When? How about Saturday?" "I'm free in the afternoon." "Saturday works," she said, grinning. "You're not gonna make me climb under a bridge, are you?" He smirked, his eyes crinkling. "No promises." They spent the rest of the afternoon planning their outing, tossing around ideas for other Seattle spots to explore. Emma felt a thrill she hadn't felt in years, not just the excitement of a potential date, but the sense that she was on the edge of something real. Noah was different, not like the guys she'd dated before, who were all flash and no substance. He was quiet, thoughtful, and a little broken, just like her. As she walked home that night, the rain soaking through her jacket, she couldn't stop smiling. Saturday couldn't come fast enough. Saturday was crisp and clear, a rare sunny day in Seattle that made the city feel like it was showing off. Emma met Noah outside Brew and Muse, her nerves buzzing like a live wire. She'd spent way too long picking out her outfit, a green sweater that brought out her eyes, jeans that hugged her curves just right, and her favorite leather boots before. Reminding herself this wasn't a date, or was it? She couldn't tell, and the uncertainty was driving her a little crazy. Noah showed up in a black jacket and faded jeans, his hair slightly messy from the wind. He looked effortlessly cool, like he'd just stepped out of a music video, and Emma had to resist the urge to stare. "Ready to meet the troll?" he asked, his eyes crinkling at the corners. "Born ready," she said, falling into step beside him. They took the bus to Fremont, chatting about everything and nothing, favorite food trucks, the best dive bars, the time Emma accidentally locked herself out of her apartment in the middle of a storm. Noah laughed, his usual reserve melting away, and Emma felt a warmth in her chest that had nothing to do with the sun. The Fremont troll was exactly as Noah described, a massive, hulking concrete sculpture lurking under the Aurora Bridge, its gnarled fingers clutching a real Volkswagen Beetle. Tourists were snapping photos, and a group of kids was climbing on its head, giggling as their parents shouted at them to be careful. "Okay, this is way cooler than I expected," Emma said, circling the troll. "How'd you find out about it?" "I used to sketch here when I first moved to town," Noah said, shoving his hands in his pockets. "It's got this weird energy, like it's watching you." She laughed, nudging his shoulder. "Creepy. I love it." They wandered through Fremont afterward, popping into quirky shops filled with vintage records and handmade jewelry. They grabbed tacos from a food truck, the spicy carnitas dripping onto their hands as they sat on a bench by the canal. The conversation flowed effortlessly. Emma told him about her dream of visiting Iceland to see the northern lights, and Noah admitted he'd always wanted to road trip across the Southwest, sketching the deserts and ghost towns. As the sun dipped below the horizon, they ended up at Gasworks Park, sprawled on a blanket Noah had brought. The city skyline glittered across Lake Union, the Space Needle standing like a sentinel against the dusk. Emma lay back, her hands behind her head, feeling more at peace than she had in years. "So," she said, staring at the stars, "what's the deal with you, Noah? You're like this mysterious artist guy who shows up in my life and makes me visit giant trolls. What's your story?" He lay down beside her, his shoulder brushing hers. "Not much to tell. Grew up in Chicago, moved here for a fresh start. I draw, I drink too much coffee. I try not to screw things up." She turned her head to look at him, her eyes narrowing playfully. "That's the Cliff's Notes version. What's the real story?" He was quiet for a long moment, his gaze fixed on the sky. "I had a rough couple of years back in Chicago," he said finally. "Lost someone close to me. It messed me up for a while. Moving here was my way of hitting reset." Her heart ached at the pain in his voice, raw and unguarded. "I'm sorry," she said softly. "You don't have to talk about it if you don't want to." "It's okay," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "I just don't usually tell people. But you're easy to talk to." She smiled, her chest tightening. "You're not so bad yourself." They stayed like that for a while, the world fading away until it was just the two of them, the stars, and the quiet hum of the city. Emma didn't know when she started falling for Noah, but lying there beside him, she knew there was no going back. This was real, messy, complicated, and real. The next few months were a whirlwind of coffee dates, late-night texts, and stolen moments. Emma and Noah were inseparable, their connection deepening with every shared laugh and quiet confession. They explored Seattle together, throwing fish at Pike Place Market, riding the elevator to the top of the Space Needle, discovering hidden bookstores in Belltown where they'd spend hours flipping through dusty novels. Noah started opening up more, showing Emma his sketches, dark, intricate cityscapes that felt alive with emotion. He was working on a graphic novel, he told her, a story about loss and redemption set in a fictional version of Chicago. Emma was in awe of his talent, the way he could capture so much feeling in a few strokes of a pencil. Emma, in turn, shared her own dreams and fears. She told him about her childhood, growing up in her parents' bookstore, surrounded by stories but always feeling like she was searching for her own. She admitted her fear of never making it as an artist, of being stuck designing soulless logos for the rest of her life. Noah listened, his gray eyes steady, and she felt seen in a way she never had before. One night, they were at Noah's apartment, a tiny studio in Queen Anne crammed with art supplies, secondhand furniture, and stacks of graphic novels. They'd ordered pizza half pepperoni for Noah, half veggie for Emma, and were sprawled on the floor, a half-empty bottle of cheap Merlot between them. Noah was sketching her, his pencil moving in quick, confident strokes as she sat cross-legged, sipping her wine. "You're gonna make me look like a potato, aren't you?" Emma teased, tucking a strand of hair behind her ear. "Nah," he said, not looking up. "You're more like a really cute squash." She laughed, throwing a pizza crust at him. He caught it and grinned, setting his sketchbook aside. "Come here," he said, patting the floor beside him. She scooted closer, her heart racing. They were sitting so close now, their knees brushing, the air between them electric. Emma could feel the weight of the moment, the unspoken tension that had been building for weeks. "Emma," Noah said, his voice serious, "I need to tell you something." Her stomach dropped. "Okay." He took a deep breath, his gray eyes locking onto hers. "I'm falling for you, like hard. And it scares the hell out of me because I haven't felt this way in a long time. Not since before. But I can't keep pretending it's just whatever this is." Her breath caught. She'd been waiting for this, hoping for it, but hearing him say it out loud made it real. Her heart was pounding so loud she was sure he could hear it. "Noah," she said, her voice trembling, "I'm falling for you too. I have been for a while." He reached for her hand, his fingers intertwining with hers, warm and steady. "So what do we do about it?" She smiled, leaning closer, her eyes never leaving his. "This." And then she kissed him. It was soft at first, tentative, like they were both afraid of breaking the moment. But it quickly deepened, all the unspoken feelings of the past few months pouring into it, every late-night conversation, every shared laugh, every glance that lingered too long. When they finally pulled apart, they were both breathless, their foreheads pressed together. "Well," Noah said, his voice husky, "that's one way to answer." Emma laughed, her heart soaring. "I've got more where that came from." They stayed up half the night, talking and kissing and laughing, the pizza growing cold on the floor. For the first time in years, Emma felt like she was exactly where she was meant to be. Being with Noah was like living in a dream Emma never wanted to wake up from. They spent their days working side by side at Brew and Muse, their nights tangled up in each other, talking about everything from their favorite books to their biggest fears. But love, as Emma was learning, wasn't all coffee dates and starry nights. It came with challenges, ones that tested them both in ways they hadn't expected. Noah's past was a shadow that lingered. Even in their happiest moments, he didn't talk much about the person he'd lost in Chicago, his sister. Emma learned in bits and pieces, who'd died in a car accident, but she could see the weight of it in the way he sometimes withdrew, his eyes distant and haunted. It happened most often at night, when they were lying in bed, the city quiet outside his window. He'd go silent, his jaw tight, and Emma would feel a pang of helplessness. She wanted to help him, to carry some of that pain, but she didn't know how to ask without pushing him away. Meanwhile, Emma's own insecurities were bubbling to the surface. Her freelance work was drying up, the gigs she'd relied on replaced by cheaper designers or AI tools that promised good enough for half the price. Rejection emails piled up in her inbox, each one chipping away at her confidence. She started doubting herself, wondering if she was good enough for her career, for Noah, for the life she wanted. She tried to hide it, putting on a brave face, but Noah saw through her. One night, after a particularly brutal rejection from a big client, the music label she'd been dying to work with, Emma broke down in Noah's apartment. They were sitting on his couch, a half-finished bottle of wine on the coffee table, when the email came through. She read it, her face crumpling, and before she could stop herself, she was sobbing. "I'm such a fraud," she said, her voice breaking. "I keep pretending I know what I'm doing, but I'm just failing, over and over." Noah pulled her into his arms, his hand stroking her hair. "You're not a fraud, Emma," he said, his voice steady. "You're one of the most talented people I know, and you're not failing, you're just figuring it out. We both are." She looked up at him, her eyes red and blurry. "How do you do that? How do you make everything sound okay?" He brushed a tear from her cheek, his touch gentle. "Because I believe in you, and I'm not going anywhere." His words were a lifeline, pulling her back from the edge. But even as she leaned into him, she couldn't shake the fear that she wasn't enough, that one day he'd see her, the way she saw herself, and walk away. By spring, Emma and Noah were ready to take a leap. Noah's graphic novel was starting to take shape, the pages filled with hauntingly beautiful drawings and a story that cut straight to the heart. Emma had landed a gig designing the cover, a project that felt like a dream come true. They decided to move in together, pooling their savings for a small apartment in Capitol Hill. It wasn't much, a cramped one-bedroom with creaky floors, a leaky faucet, and a view of a brick wall, but it was theirs, a canvas for their shared life. Moving in together brought them closer, but it also amplified their flaws. Emma's messiness drove Noah up the wall. Her habit of leaving coffee mugs on every surface was a particular point of contention in Noah's tendency to shut down when he was stressed. Frustrated Emma, they fought, sometimes over silly things, like whose turn it was to do dishes, sometimes over bigger things like money or the future, but they always found their way back to each other, their fights ending in apologies and quiet moments of reconnection. One evening, after a particularly heated argument about whose turn it was to do laundry, Noah grabbed his sketchbook and started drawing. Emma watched him from the couch, her anger fading as she saw the familiar intensity in his eyes. "What are you working on?" she asked, her voice softer now. He showed her the pages sketch of the two of them, sitting at their brew and muse table, their hands brushing as they reached for their coffee cups. The details were stunning, the curve of her smile, the way his hair fell into his eyes, the warmth of the moment captured in graphite. "This," he said, "this is what matters, not the stupid laundry." She smiled, sliding closer to him. "You're such a sap." "Only for you," he said, kissing her forehead. They sat there for a while, the sketchbook open between them, the fight forgotten. Emma realized that this, their messy, imperfect life, was what she'd been searching for all along, not perfection, but something real. As summer rolled into Seattle, Emma and Noah hit their stride. Noah's graphic novel was picked up by a small press, and Emma's cover design was getting buzz in the local art scene. They celebrated with a picnic at Discovery Park, sprawled on a blanket with a spread of cheese, crackers, and a bottle of rose they de-splurged on. The sun was setting over the Puget Sound, painting the sky in shades of pink and gold, and Emma felt a contentment she hadn't known was possible. But life, as always, had a way of throwing curveballs. Noah started getting calls from galleries in New York and Los Angeles, interested in showcasing his work. It was the kind of opportunity he'd dreamed of, but it meant long stretches away from Seattle, away from Emma. She was thrilled for him, but the thought of him leaving, even temporarily, stirred up old fears. What if distance changed things? What if he met someone else? Someone who wasn't drowning in doubt? She tried to keep her worries to herself, but Noah noticed. One night, as they were cooking dinner in their tiny kitchen, pasta with homemade marinara, a rare joint effort, he set down the wooden spoon and turned to her. "You've been quiet lately," he said. "What's going on?" She hesitated, stirring the sauce to avoid his gaze. "It's nothing, just work stress." "Emma," he said, his voice gentle but firm. "Talk to me," she sighed, setting down her own spoon. "I'm scared," she admitted. "You're going to New York, and it's amazing, but what if you realize you don't need me? What if I'm holding you back?" He stepped closer, his hands resting on her shoulders. "Emma, listen to me. You're not holding me back. You're the reason I'm even doing this. You make me want to be better, to take risks. I'm not going anywhere, not really. I'm coming back to you." Tears pricked her eyes, but she nodded, leaning into him. "Promise, promise," he said, kissing her softly. Noah left for New York in August, and the first few weeks were harder than Emma expected. Their apartment felt too quiet without him, the absence of his sketchbooks and coffee mugs a constant reminder that he was gone. They texted constantly and FaceTimed when they could, but the time difference and Noah's packed schedule made it tricky. Emma threw herself into her work, landing a few new clients, but the loneliness crept in at night, when she'd crawl into bed and stare at the empty space beside her. Noah, meanwhile, was navigating a world that was both thrilling and overwhelming. The New York art scene was intense, galleries openings, collectors who spoke in jargon he barely understood. He sent Emma photos of his sketches, of the city's towering skyline, of the dive bar, where he'd had the best burger of his life. She loved seeing his excitement, but it also made her feel like she was losing him to a bigger, shinier world. One night, during a late FaceTime call, Noah looked exhausted, his eyes shadowed. "I miss you," he said, his voice rough. "This place is incredible, but it's not home, your home." Emma's heart swelled, but she couldn't shake her doubts. "You sure about that? You're like living the dream out there." He shook his head. The dream's only half complete without you. They made it work. Through late-night calls and care packages, Emma sent him a tin of his favorite coffee beans. Noah mailed her a sketch of the Brooklyn Bridge with a note that said, "Wish you were here." When he came back to Seattle in October, they fell into each other's arms at the airport, the distance melting away in an instant. A year after they met, Emma and Noah were back at Brew and Muse, sitting at their usual table. Noah's graphic novel was set to be published the following spring, and Emma's cover design was getting rave reviews. They'd weathered their storms: grief, doubt, distance, the messinaces of life, and come out stronger. Their apartment was filled with new memories, a wall of Polaroids from their adventures, a shelf of books they'd read together, a coffee maker they'd bought after one too many mornings fighting over the last cup. "I was thinking," Noah said, setting down his pencil, "maybe we should take a trip, somewhere new, just you and me." Emma raised an eyebrow, her latte halfway to her lips. "Like where?" "I dunno. New Orleans, Austin, somewhere with good food, live music, and weird art." She grinned, leaning forward. "I'm in. But only if we can stop at every coffee shop along the way." "Deal," he said, his eyes see our inkling dot as they sat there. The rain tapping against the window, Emma felt a quiet certainty settle over her. This, her, and Noah, their shared dreams, their imperfect, beautiful life was real. Too real to ignore. They'd built something together, not just a relationship, but a partnership, a shared vision of a life filled with art, love, and the courage to keep going. Thank you for diving into Emma and Noah's story. I hope their journey, their coffee romance, their Seattle adventures, the way they found each other in the chaos of life felt as vivid to you as it did to me. If you connected with their story, if it made you laugh, cry, or think about your own moments of love and struggle, I'd love to hear from you. Drop a comment on our channel, share your favorite moment, or tell us about a love story that feels too real to ignore in your life. And if you want more stories like this, raw, heartfelt, and a little messy, hit that subscribe button and join our community. Let's keep the stories brewing.